Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Twat Talk. I'm your host, Roscoe M. And today we're going to be talking about a little bit more on what I do outside of this. What do I do outside of the podcast, outside of YouTube, all that kind of shit. And I thought I'd talk to you all about it today because we got some questions in through the Discord server. So I have a Discord server. It's not an open public one. It's very much closed off, very much gated, just due to problems in the past. But there were a couple really interesting questions, right? And I will say, a lot of these questions are on the deeper side, and they all come from friend of the channel, Fake Sheeb. I'm not going to get to them all, but I am going to try and answer some of them at least. And there's one of them in particular that I thought would make a great podcast episode, because I realize I've never actually done a podcast episode about what I do outside of this. I've mentioned that I'm a photographer / videographer, but I've never actually spoken about it in an episode. So I've got my laptop here in front of me, or next to me rather, and I've got this question, right? And the question was, when you take photos, what is it you're looking to capture? What do you seek to evoke? Do you have a message to convey or something you want the viewer to take from viewing each frame? What's the most important element of photography to you? Which is a fantastic question, and I'm going to get the second part out of the way first. What's the most important element of photography to me? And that, because that one I can give a really quick answer compared to the other one. And the most important element of photography to me is that you enjoy it. Which sounds like the really bullshit, stupid answer, but no, seriously. The thing that I can say the most to any photographers out there, right, or to anyone who's looking at getting into photography, make sure you like it first, right? Get a cheap secondhand, don't go all in on. I know somebody who got a camera, who shall remain nameless, and they bought a Sony Alpha 2, I think it was. The Alpha 4 is not long out, and it's not the 3. I've used the 3. The 3 is a lovely camera. And the A7C, which is basically the compact version of the 3, is also a lovely camera. I use that quite regularly. In fact, it's what I record my YouTube videos with. I will say Sony do make some lovely cameras. Their newer range are all mirrorless as well. And anyway, that's a whole camera ramble that I could get into, which we may do later on at the podcast. But because I'll talk about a little bit on my own journey through photography and stuff like that as well. But the most important element of photography is the fact that you enjoy it, right? Because if you hate it, if you don't enjoy photography, even to an extent, you maybe don't love every genre of photography. I know me personally, I don't like doing landscapes. I don't like doing nature stuff. Personally, because I find them too still, if that makes sense. Like, I find them, they sit still for too long. They're quite boring to me. Not to say I can't appreciate when it's done right. I love a good landscape photo, right? And it's not that I don't enjoy looking at them. I just hate making them. I hate going through the effort to do landscape stuff, and it's why I very rarely do it. I tend to find that my strengths as a photographer tend to be in street photography. They tend to be maybe architecture, portraiture I've been quite drawn to. Yeah, there's a lot of, essentially you could say that I like photographing infrastructure because, like, trains and cars and buses, all these things like public roads. I also love photographing people, which, given that I don't particularly like people that much, despite what I keep telling everyone, I I'm a massive introvert, but I love working with people when it comes to doing photography, because to me it's one of those things, and I can get into it a bit more later, but the collaboration between me and someone else and getting something that we're both happy with, and the feedback that you get and the feeling that you get afterwards when somebody compliments your work, it's unlike anything fucking else, right? And to me, that's what keeps me doing photography. I can love it as much as I want, but it's hearing that other people enjoy it that is like, yeah, this is why I want to do this as a job. This is why it's not just a hobby. This is why I'm not just doing it for me. I want to do this for other people. Also, I want to make people feel good about themselves. I've had several occasions people have said to me like, oh, I wasn't entirely sure on the way I looked, or I've had some body image issues and I saw your photos and I felt good about myself. And that is like, that's it for me. That is like what I want. I want people, because others have done it for me. People that I've studied with and things like that, they've taken photos of me and I've gone, I really fucking like that. Can you send me that picture? And that's a really nice moment as a photographer when someone says that they enjoy your work or you made them feel good about themselves. It makes you feel good because you're like, okay, I'm doing something right. I take this forward into the next thing I do and I keep doing it and I keep essentially, photography is either making people feel good, or fulfilling a brief or something like that. In some way, you have accomplished a goal that you set out to do, and then you're continually chasing the high off that. It's a bit like an addiction, to be honest. Which is not something I ever thought I'd say about my work, but it is kind of an addiction where you're like, okay, like the client, piss off, phone, Jesus Christ. Can you not? Okay. Sorry, I should put that on silent really before I start the podcast. But yeah, like, somebody will say to you like, oh, I really love that photo of me. I want, thank you for taking that. Thank you for like, essentially, thank you for taking those with me paying you to do it, right? And I'm like, fantastic. That feels good. How do I do that next time? And you constantly chase that feeling, that high almost of going, oh, somebody else thinks it's good. Oh, that person's happy with the photo. They're happy with that photo. They're happy with that photo. And you chase that constantly. And to be honest, I could apply that to several areas. What's the reason that I make YouTube videos? One, to share my opinions. First of all, and photography, it's the same. I do it because I love it and I want to express myself through images, right? At least some aspect of myself through images. And I do the same on YouTube. It just so happens that my YouTube stuff is focused on the more gaming side of myself and the sort of media analysis side of me. Whereas the photography is more on, I'll get into it later. I've got my own philosophy that I use when it comes to photography, and I'll try come back round to it if I remember, because this is going to be a rambly bastard of a podcast. But the first reason is that I want to share that part of me with other people to see, to generate discussion, things like that. But the other reason is validation, which is what everyone, and to me, everyone says like, oh, you're just chasing external validation. And like, yeah, aren't we all to some extent? Why do we do things? First of all, for ourselves, but second of all, because we want other people to tell us that we're doing a good job. And I do it when I get comments and stuff on my videos, if people have been like, oh, this was a really great video, or you made some really good points here. That feels good. That's validation. That's telling me I'm doing something right. And that tells me that that's the direction to push forward in. And that's definitely part of it. I wouldn't say validation should be your primary reason, but also people make things and share them to be validated. Because if you didn't want validation at all, if you didn't want any form of validation, you wouldn't share it. You wouldn't put it out there. In my opinion, you wouldn't put something out there unless you want some form of feedback on it. whether it's critique, whether it's praise, whether it's enjoyment, you want some kind of interaction with it. And to me, all of that interaction is a form of validation. When I'm saying validation here, I don't mean that you want people to say you're good at something. You just want other people to interact with it in some way. And to me, that's what I mean by chasing validation. You're chasing people to interact with what you make in some fashion. So, bringing this back to photography, the most important element is enjoyment. And then, other than that, I would say what has been the most important for me is expression. It's allowed me to take periods of my life and, sort of bundle them up into little pieces. Funny, I was having this discussion the other day with Aidan, who was on the last episode of the podcast, the Imperial Academy. We were having a discussion off stream talking about, we were just talking about the channels, and kind of what our plans were and what we were doing and things like that. And I was talking about how I haven't really made much after the, I'm kind of in the middle of a, I'm in between things at the minute in the YouTube channel, which I think is why I've fallen back on the podcast so much recently. Because I don't really know where I'm going with the channel right now. I'm kind of stuck between videos and things like that, and it's just a bit of a creative rut. And I think I just need to take a step away from it for a while and then come back to it with a refreshed mind. But we're talking about it, and I said something like, there's this era, there's this era, there's this. And he's like, it's really funny that you separate it into eras. And to me, those eras are based on how I felt at the time. So those eras are based on emotional state and maturity. So, like the stuff I was making a couple years ago, like the DMC3, that's a really weird way to say that. The DMC3, the Dishonored, the Spider-Man video, like that kind of era. Like, there's an era there. And then there's what I see is a very clear divide. If I pull up the videos now next to me, I know that there's a divide somewhere. I'd just to hazard a guess, I'd probably say around the kind of time of March 9th, 2024 is when a new era started, because the videos started to move in a different direction than what they had previously. It moved away from strictly review, and it moved more towards almost, I hate to use the word, but almost like an artistic interpretation, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not telling you whether or not this is good or bad. It's essentially just, here's my thoughts on it. I'm not trying to tell you whether or not it's good, whether it's bad, objectively. I'm just giving you my experience of it. And technically I always am giving you only my experience, but this is when it became more of a point of my personal experience with the game, rather than, what does it do? Almost like a Wikipedia checklist of what the game does, good and bad. But yeah, so we were talking about that. There's different eras for me of the channel, and he doesn't separate his channel that way. He just sees it as a steady progression. And I'm like, that's fair enough. And I've kind of done the same with my photography. When I think about the photographs, it's not always necessarily the content of them that makes it an important photo. It's where I was mentally at the time. And now I find that photography has become my space for when things are shit. I tend to move towards photography and things like that because it's a way of expressing those thoughts, and it's also a way to dig me out of those thoughts. If I'm having a really shitty week, sometimes someone suggesting to go out and do a photo shoot can be the best thing in the fucking world for me, because it allows me to take my mind off of what's going on and focus on all these different elements, exposure and, composition and all this, light and shade and where it's all coming from, and what am I trying to say with each photo and things like that. And, like, why did I take the photos I took? Are some of them bangers or some of them not? Because not every photo you take is a banger. Photographers will know that. Not every photo you take is bang on the money. Sometimes you need to take 1 or 2 or 20 before you actually get it right. And depending on what situation you're in, depending on what kind of photography you're doing, that's either a good or a bad thing. Like for street photography, for example, needing 20 shots to get the same idea is not ideal because you want it to be quick and spontaneous and natural. Whereas, it's fine to take like 4 hours on one shot when you're doing studio work because, you have time to play around and you want to get it exactly right because you have full control. Whereas out in the street, you don't have any control. You really have like none. You're at the whim of so many things, the weather, the space around you, the people surrounding you if you're out in public in the streets. There really is a lot. Like, even something as simple as, like, it might be sunny, but there's clouds, and your entire plan is fucked now because the lighting is so flat, when really you went out and you wanted really harsh, like, contrasty light. And all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this comes back to, like, the emotional attachment I form is more where I am at with each photo, and less about... It's less about the photo itself. And that, to me, is, what makes them interesting. But let's come back to the first part of that question. When you take photos, what is it you're looking to capture? What do you seek to evoke? Do you have a message to convey, or something you want the viewer to take from viewing each frame? So those are several questions. So we'll start with the last one. So, do I have a message to convey? Or something I want the viewer to take from viewing each frame? With certain projects, yes. With certain subjects. So, recently I was out. I can't name the location for fear of doxing myself. But I was out today and a couple weeks ago at a particular location, and there's a lot of old machinery, right? And that's what I was taking photos of. I was taking photos of old, rotting machinery. Things that have been left to rust and all this kind of stuff from, years ago. There's stuff there from the kind of early 1900s, even into the late 1800s, all the way up to... I think the most modern thing I've seen in there was maybe the 1990s. I want to say something around that era. Right, but there's a lot of stuff going on, right? And there's a lot of machinery that I was taking pictures of. And it's all very fascinating. And the thing that I want to take from that... What I want the viewers to take from it when I eventually put them together into a book, is I want people to see the beauty in it, because a lot of people look at old rusty things and go, "Oh God, what an eyesore that is." But I think if you frame them if you frame anything the right way, it can look pretty in a picture. If you frame something in the right way, it can look appealing. I'm not saying that, you'll turn a concrete block into something gorgeous, but if you shoot that concrete block in just the right way, you make it interesting. At the very least, you either make it interesting or you make it pretty, right? And all these rusted machines and old trains and stuff that are all falling apart, and there's rotting wood and things like that. You're not going to make them look pretty. right? Particularly when you've got, like, for example, one of the things that was there was a rotting canal boat. There's no way to make that look pretty. There's moss all over it. The paint's, chipped to fuck. All this kind of stuff. But when you shoot it the right way, so what I was doing is I was focusing in on individual pieces of it and not necessarily the whole things. So when you focus in on elements of it and you shoot it in black and white so that you're focusing on texture and light and not the colours, I think they turn out rather beautiful. There's a lot of interesting lines, there's a lot of interesting textures, a lot of good shape. And again, when the lighting is working in your favour, it can look absolutely gorgeous, I think. Even though the literal photo that I'm staring at in front of me is the side of a rotting train. Because it's been left outside, it's been exposed to the elements, and there's all moss and everything all over it, and but it looks pretty. And it looks interesting. And from that project in particular, I want people to take that from it. That even in something that you look at and think is an eyesore, there's still something nice about it. And then also from that, I want to evoke, maybe from older members, or older viewers that may look at it, almost a nostalgia. There's a nostalgia to these things. Like people that were alive in people that were alive before the 60s, which you're very quickly running out of, that will be reminded of a time that they lived when they see, like an old steam engine, or people that grew up after that in the sort of 70s into the 80s with the old diesel engines that are there. There's a nostalgia to them that people really like. And I think, again, putting them in black and white really helps with that, because it just evokes that era from before. But it's almost as if you've taken the style from that era and dropped it into the sad reality of the modern day, where these things are a relic of the past that are just left to rot and are sitting there basically as just display pieces now. None of them are, very rarely are they used. And there is a sadness to it. But yeah, that's just one project. When I'm looking to evoke in other stuff, I've had to do some advertising shoots recently, for college, not for work. And, make up some fake adverts, and one of them I did was a Monster can. And the thing you're trying to evoke with that is you're trying to evoke the feeling of, I want to buy that looks appealing, I want to, like with Monster, I want to drink it. Or the other one I did was a cake, and you go, I want to eat that. And there's a certain approach that you take with that. You have to light it in a way that's, again, you have to make the photo look interesting, but also not any way that shows the product in a negative light. You have to make it look appealing, which turns out with some things really easy, right? Monster kind of has, the flavor of Monster that I drink, Aussie Lemonade, it's got nice vibrant colors, it's very bright and everything like that. It's very eye-catching. Whereas with another one, with the chocolate cake that I'm looking at right now, I went a little bit more low-key with it. Not low-key as in like the lighting technique, in case there's any photographers listening. It wasn't high-key either. It was very kind of natural-looking light. Probably minimalist is the better word, because it's a white background, a kind of silvery textured bottom, to kind of look similar to like a kitchen worktop. You've got the cake there. You've got a little chalkboard that I wrote special chocolate cake on, as if it's like sitting in a restaurant. And then just a nice little tea towel next to it. And that's it. That's all the photo is. It's so simple. But it looks appealing. And you make it look nice, and you light it very well and stuff like that. And it's lovely. It's some of my favourite shooting I've done. recently. Whereas, there's other photos that I just take because I like them. They're not necessarily conveying any message. And to me, that's fine. To me, your photo doesn't always have to have a message because people will take what they want from it anyway. So even if there's something you don't intend, I'd say let it happen. Let people free associate. Because it's an important part, I think, of the artistic process, is that people are allowed to freely associate what they want with an image. It's partially the reason why, despite having done headshots for a member of Scottish Parliament, I have not posted them. Because if I post a member of Parliament on my social media, people will instantly assume that I agree with that member of Parliament. And it wouldn't matter, for example, I could shoot a picture of a Labour MP, a Conservative MP, and it doesn't fucking matter. Because if I post them, I'm going to get a shitstorm in the comments of both sides arguing against one another over who's better. Because when you post things, when you post political people, unless you're outright disagreeing with them in the post, people will assume you side with them by default. So it's why I don't post it. And I try to post stuff when I post on social media, when I'm posting things for my business, I try and do it as neutrally as I can. And a lot of the times I try and come at it from an outsider perspective. Because a lot of the time with these shoots, I am just an outsider. I am not involved with the people or the companies or whatever I'm shooting. I'm not actually involved with him. For example, like a client will have asked me to do pictures for them, but I'm not involved in what they do. All they've done is come to me and ask, will you do a job? And I go, sure. So, for example, I did a shoot that was a wrestling event. I know bugger all about wrestling. I've never watched wrestling in my life. And yet I still did this shoot and I still enjoyed it. And the pictures got used as well. That's the important, right? And that's the important bit. The pictures got used, which means that the client was happy with them. And I totally forgot where I was going with that point. But yeah, essentially, that's what it was. I'm not always involved personally with whatever I'm shooting. Sometimes a job is a job. But a lot of the time, if I'm taking photos for myself, it tends to be about things that interest me. I've got a couple projects going on right now for myself. And some of them, they do kind of have a message, but kind of not. One of them is called Constructed Emptiness, right? And it's just, I noticed a trend when I was out and about, because, occasionally I'll go walks and things like that, or I find myself walking around places, and I notice so many man-made things. Terribly sorry. Oh. I notice so many man-made things, structures or, certain roads and things like that no one's using. Absolutely nobody is using it. A couple that I've used is like bus stops. Let me pull the project up really quickly. So some of them that I've got are like benches, like outside stairways, sort of industrial units that don't have anything in them. Again, one of them actually in here is a bench that's broken. Again, things like bus stops and all this kind of thing when there's nobody waiting in them. And I love that project. That's one of my favourite projects that I've been working on kind of on and off whenever I find an image that fits. And it does kind of, to me, there's no immediate message. It's just something I found interesting and I started photographing. But, people are free to take whatever they want from that, that we're creating too much and that we're not using it all to the fullest, or, something may be, what's the word? What's the word for when it doesn't have a use, but you built it anyway? Superfluous. That's the word. Something might just be superfluous. There's no point to it. It's just been built to be built, essentially. I know that at the very least, the local council have been doing that a lot recently, because they've been trying to, the local council around me, they have been doing a lot of, not necessarily roadworks, but yeah, a lot of roadworks, installing a lot of things, like a lot of random out of nowhere, whatever, for whatever reason, my local council has decided that pedestrian crossings need to be on every road about 5 fucking minutes apart from each other. Like on the same fucking road, by the way, right? So they have one, like nearby where I live, and that's fair enough. That's a fairly well-traversed area. And then you walk like another 5 fucking minutes up the road, like, which here is, barely any space, and there's another one. And then you go another 5 minutes up the road, and there's another one. It's like, what the fuck? Why so many pedestrian crossings? And the reason they're putting them in is because they've got a surplus of budget, and they're going, well, fuck, we need to do something with it, otherwise we won't get it next year. So they just start fucking things up, and they just start shutting off roads and putting random bollocks roadworks up just so that they can spend fucking money, right? And to me, that's potentially what that project could be about. The fucking useless shit that gets put up, when the local council has nothing else to spend money on. Even though there are genuine things that they could be spending money on. Like, all the roads they're fixing are not ones that people were ever fucking complaining about. And if anything, by shutting them off, they've created so much bastard traffic that you're just destroying all the other fucking roads. And yeah, it's really annoying. But yeah, so essentially my main thing is that I never go into a photo with the idea that it has a message to it. Or anything like that, or there's any particular interpretation. I kind of just leave it up to the viewer most of the time to take what they want from it, because they will do it naturally anyway. They'll take what they want from it. There's the whole idea of death of the author, that essentially once how I believe it goes, because I haven't checked the definition beforehand, is that after you have published a piece of work as an author, essentially whatever you meant by it, whatever you intended with it, doesn't fucking matter. The audience will interpret it on their own. And it's kind of a thing of saying, don't get angry if someone interprets your work, quote unquote, the wrong way or not the way you intended. Because it's just a natural part of the human experience that people interpret things in different ways, and that's what makes us all unique. Blah, blah, blah. You've heard it a million fucking times. So I kind of let that happen with most of my projects. I let people just associate my pictures with what they want to. A lot of the time, why I take the picture in the first place is because it looks interesting. I was talking about how I do a lot of architecture. I did one of them, right? And the building itself in Glasgow is fucking dreadful to look at, right? It's massive. It's fucking huge for a start. It's very boxy looking. It's not got much. Like, everything is all sort of, right angles and straight lines. And it's all one shade of dark grey concrete, right? And a lot of people in Glasgow will probably, just from that description, know what building I'm talking about. Maybe not the exact one, there's quite a few. But this particular one, right? But the one thing it did have was it had a walkway going from the main building across Sorry. Ugh. Ugh. Sorry. Been a busy morning. So what it did have, from the main building, it had a walkway going across the road to a little set, a stairway. So you could easily cross the road without having to leave at the front of the building, which is way around the opposite side, walk all the way around, blah, blah. Right, you can just leave out of this entrance. Ironically enough, it had the shutter pulled down. But what I did is I got on ground level and sort of shot upwards towards where those two sections, where the main building and that bridge intersected. And because of the way I shot it and the angle I shot it at, you end up with a lot of really interesting lines. Things like that. And again, that was just an idea that came to me while I was there, and it looked cool. And this kind of comes to the thing of, when I take photos, what is it I'm looking to capture? For the most part, I want to just capture what is in front of me the way that I saw it in my mind. Because that's part of the beauty to me of photography, is that every photograph you look at, and I'm planning to show this off at some point. I'm part of a camera club in my area. And there's one of the nights where me and one of the other guys are going to go head to head, and we're going to go to the same place on the same day. He's going to pick a location, I'll pick a location, and then there's I believe we're going to do a third location, right, that none of us have picked. Someone else will maybe, have picked it for us. And we're going to go to the same place, same day, same time, so that there are no difference in the conditions. We're both working under the same thing. So if the lighting's shit that day, the lighting is shit. And it'll be shit for both of us. So, but what we're planning to show is that two people can go to the same exact place at the same exact time and look at it in completely different ways. And that's always what I love about photography. It doesn't matter if I've seen a picture of a place, because I'll go there and I'll see my own pictures. And it's one of those things about photography. It sounds really cliche to say that it changed the way that I look at the world, but it really does, right? Because when you start looking around you, and when you have an idea in mind, for example, like I went out, maybe I think it was about a week ago, I went out, and I just went out with my compact Sony camera, and I just had a 16 to 50mm lens, right? Which, for those who are not in the know, that's not a very long lens. So basically, the higher the millimeter of lens, the more zoom you have, right? And the further away you can see. So a 50 is not that far, right? 50, when you look at things through a 50mm camera, it's basically how your eye sees interprets the world. You interpret the world at around 50mm, but your peripheral vision is, I believe, as wide as a 28mm lens. So if you could somehow merge the two of them, that you have the wide, the peripheral vision of a 28mm, but with the perspective and the lack of distortion that comes from a 50, you basically have how your eye interprets the world. Anyway, that's besides the point. So I went out with a 16 to 50mm lens and a little compact camera, and I put the camera profile into black and white, because the lighting was absolutely shit that day. It was very flat. There was a lot of clouds in the sky. And there was no way that I was going to get, some nice, harsh, contrasty images, or be able to do a lot with color. Because again, where I was shooting, there's a lot of sort of like brick buildings and tan and grey concrete and all this kind of stuff. A lot of buildings that were all just kind of one color the whole way through, which typically doesn't make for a great photograph. You want a lot of contrast, you want variations and things. So what I decided was I would challenge myself to shoot exclusively using black and white. So it focused in on light and shadow and shape and texture, right? It focused in on those elements. And I honestly think that they are some of the best architectural photography I've ever done. Because instead of getting enamored with the color of the building and things like that, I started to focus in on the small details about like the texture and the brickwork, or I was framing them in certain ways that created interesting shapes. I was looking for contrast where if I was shooting in color, there wouldn't have been any because the lighting was so shit and not in my favor that day. Yeah, and I find that when I go out with that in mind, it really does help me get certain I'm trying to think of the word now off the top of my head, because that thought kind of got away from me a little bit. It helps me to focus in on certain ideas and to see things a certain way. That's what it was. Yeah, when I'm shooting in color versus when I'm shooting in black and white, you see it completely differently. Because when I'm looking through the viewfinder, or I'm looking on the little screen and you see only the black and white, you don't take some pictures you might have taken in color. And if you had taken it in color, you'd have maybe went back on it later and went, that was actually quite a shit picture. Whereas in black and white, what I found was I was taking the pictures, but then they also work well in color, because when I put them into my editing software, when I put them into Lightroom, Lightroom Classic is what I use to edit. When I put them in there, obviously the raw file keeps all the data for having it in color. So I'm looking at them in color and I'm going, yeah, they're nice. But then flip them into black and white and they go, wow, like these are way better, because that's how they were shot. And, you know, if I was shooting for color, they would have maybe looked better with the color, because I would have used that to compose. And, you know, and I thought it was really interesting. But yeah, that comes back to when I take photos, what am I looking to capture? Generally, I try and capture what is in front of me. And the way that I saw it. You know, the way that I saw it in my head. Because that's kind of what every photographer does. You'll all have a different artistic eye. And I hate ever saying that I hate ever calling my work artistic in any way. Because I don't feel that I deserve the label, if I'm being completely and utterly fucking honest. You know, I don't feel that I deserve to be labeled as an artist. I don't think what I do is necessarily art. In any way. Don't get me wrong, I would love to be able to confidently say, yes, I am an artist. But it just doesn't feel right for what I'm making. It definitely feels wrong to ever call myself an artist. And that's why I always say to people, I am a photographer. Plus my photography ends up all over the place, because sometimes I'm doing portraiture, sometimes I'm doing events, and other times I am taking pictures of buildings or rotting machinery and calling it a project. But yeah, that's that's a little bit of answering questions about my photography. I don't know if I really want to come back to... I obviously mentioned earlier that I would talk about my own journey through photography, as it were. But I don't know. I don't know if I really need to. I don't know if it's that interesting. Because it basically started off that I did a film and TV course. During that course, we went out and took pictures in our spare time while we were trying to organise other things, because there wasn't a lot to do. And I ended up really enjoying it. People started asking me to do it more often for... I remember the first one was my sister asked me to do her engagement party. And I went along and I did it, and I did fine. I think, you know, I did okay. But I would definitely say that the pictures I take now are of a higher standard. But anyway, so people started asking me to do little events, evenings and things like that. And I thought, well, if people are going to ask me to do this, I might as well go learn how to do it properly. So I went and I learned how to do it. And I'm just finishing up that course now. I will be done in... I probably only have about maybe 3 months left. Generous estimate, maybe around 3 months left of the course. And then I'm working in it, which I've managed to. If you remember one of my podcasts, I spoke about having a job interview coming up. I now have a trial date for that job. And by the time this goes up, it'll already have been. It'll have already happened. So I'll update you guys on the next one. But yeah, I guess, and that job is going to be events and gigs and the kind of stuff that ironically enough, the stuff I started with and the things I've drawn myself to. Because I found myself getting drawn into portraiture. I really love it. And then the architecture and all that kind of stuff is just for me on the side. But yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this podcast. Would you believe that was only like 3 questions? Realistically 2 questions about why I do photography and things like that. And yeah, I've managed to answer them quite well. That's a bit big-headed for me. I think I've answered them adequately enough. And what I'll do is I'll quickly end off with one of the other questions that got asked, which is a little bit more on the light-hearted side, and it's Letterboxd top 4. I don't use Letterboxd, so get up, yous. Okay, no, what I'll do is I'll just tell you my favourite films, I guess. My top 4, we'll extend it to a top 5. My top 5 favourite movies of all time. So I would say number 1 is Silence of the Lambs. Number 2, I think I'd have to say Scarface. I really like Scarface. In number 3, I feel like I had a more concrete number 3. Number 3, middle of my top 5, I'd probably say the first Silent Hill movie. I haven't seen the second one yet. Revelations, I believe it's called. But the original Silent Hill movie, I quite enjoyed. I quite liked it. I thought it was pretty good. God, I'm trying to think of other films I've got. Hang on. I've got a bunch behind me. Let me have a quick look. No, I can't think. I'm trying to think of other fucking films I've seen. I'm rattling through it in my head like every film I've ever watched. So that's my top 3 at least. My top 3 favorite films of all time is Silence of the Lambs, Scarface, and the first Silent Hill movie. Oh god, I can't believe I'm struggling so much to think of another 2 movies that I really like. Jesus. Probably somewhere up there would be Avengers Infinity War, but that was more for the experience I had at the time of watching it, because it was one of the few films that I went to go see in the theater or in the cinema. And like just that experience of having the whole crowd there for all the scenes and hearing everybody kind of going like, oh, all that kind of stuff. It was really, that's probably, so it maybe makes it up there. I don't know if it quite makes it into the top 5, but Infinity War is up there. That actually reminds me of a really funny memory. I went to see the last Star Wars movie, Episode 9. I don't even remember what the fuck it called. Was that Rise of Skywalker? Or something like that? I don't remember what the last mainline Star Wars movie was. I'm sure Aiden could tell me if he was here. But yeah, Rise of Skywalker, I remember seeing that, and the scene at the end, where, spoilers by the way for Rise of Skywalker, the scene at the end when Rey and Kylo kiss, I remember hearing everybody in the cinema audibly groan at that, because it was really quite unnecessary. I thought to have a kind of forced romance between the two. And also there was a quite loud groan at the end when Rey announced herself as Rey Skywalker. There was quite a loud from the crowd, which I thought was quite funny. I remember that. Yeah, that's probably one of the like distinct memories of going to the cinema to see a film, is hearing everybody groan towards the end of Rise of Skywalker. But yeah, God, and during all of that, I haven't thought of another two films that I really liked. I really enjoyed, that's one I really enjoyed. I really like Bohemian Rhapsody. That's quite a good movie. I haven't watched it recently though, so maybe I'd come at it a different way now. But when I originally watched it, I really enjoyed it. And that's because at the time I was like binging Queen. Basically, I was binging Queen stuff. For like maybe a month or two, and Bohemian Rhapsody came out and sort of kept the fire burning. But yeah, I'm probably gonna leave this one here now that we've answered what my top 3 favorite films are, to put a light-hearted ending on this podcast. So I hope you've all enjoyed. If you have, remember to if you're watching this on YouTube, remember to like, subscribe, do all of that stuff. If you're watching over on Spotify, rate the podcast, give it a follow. If you want to hear more from me and other guests that I may have at some point in the future. And yeah, I will see all of you next time. Bye.